kittens. This is Our Cat's Gay, and I'm going to be blunt. Trans ideology is dangerous to everyone.
But cats, isn't that what
They
said about gay rights? How can you say that about people who are facing
discrimination.
if the glove doesn't fit, you must quit?
Woo lad. To be clear, when I say trans ideology, I'm talking about the gender theory, there is no biological sex, I am what I feel I am, not a medical condition ideology. Now, before you tell me that I'm focusing on the extremists, #not all, yes I am, because the extreme voices are the ones being listened to, the ones getting policy implemented. Yes, in the past there was a genuine fear that accepting gays and lesbians into the fold would bring society crashing down, ushering in an age of unbridled degeneracy and uncontrolled sexual predation. And while that did not happen, I'm starting to understand where the argument came from. Let's be crystal clear. Gay men and lesbian women are not, in any meaningful, real way, anything like transgendered people. Full stop. All things being equal, gay men are, for instance, otherwise normal adult men who are drawn to other adult men with the end goal of and ultimately a consensual relationship with said man. Ditto for lesbians. Trans men are women who think they are actually men, and trans women are men who think they are actually women. This is not a biological fact. It is a psychological disorder. That does not make them less than or unworthy of respect and compassion in of itself, because the condition is profoundly terrible for those who actually suffer from it. Fortunately, the condition is exceptionally rare. Unfortunately, it is being overshadowed and overwhelmed by a much larger swarm of idiotic, delusional, and unethical, utterly immoral charlatans who have politicized this rare condition and tried to pass it off as both much more common and much less involved than it really is. So why would anyone do this? Why would anyone try to claim that a medical condition is actually just another category of human being previously unknown or taboo, for power and for access to legal protections? Trans activism has been pushing many different, confusing, and contradictory lines, but I believe the most destructive has been gender self-identification, meaning if you say you are X, then you are X.
400 internet years ago.
This was utter madness, because in order for a man to become a woman, at least in the United States, and to be accepted by society to whatever degree possible, a diagnosis of gender dysphoria and formal gender reassignment therapy was required. This was reasonable, because there are a variety of psychological issues that a person may mistakenly attribute to being in the wrong body that can be, in comparison to gender transition, easily resolved. These conditions include severe depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. Dysphoric people, or more often people who think they are dysphoric, are fed the idea that transitioning will cure them, but this is magical thinking. Gender transitioning has not proven to be very effective, considering the tragically high transgender suicide rate.
Cats, that's because of transphobia, bullying, Trump!
Weapons-grade balonium. It's most often because if you fill a confused, depressed, or even mentally unstable person full of hormones and then perform radical and expensive cosmetic surgery on them, you haven't fixed them. You've just poured gasoline on the fire. Now I'm going to pull back for a second. This is my opinion, broadly speaking, and it's important not to lose all nuance. I'm not an expert, for one. Two, there is evidence that some people have a real underlying condition that aligns with some of the transgender talking points. Apparently there are some differences in brain chemistry in some people, which is a huge deal. So while I still believe that the vast majority of transgender people are being misdiagnosed, particularly because of self-identification, Canada, you need help. And Tumblr, can we please burn that site? Please. There are a small number of people with real problems that these procedures might work for. People like Blair White and Rose of Dawn are nothing like Jonathan, sorry, not sorry, Jessica, Yaniv. And don't worry, we're getting back to that thing later. Here we've established the first reason why trans activism is dangerous. The trans activist community's obsession with self-identification and the spiritualization of biology.
Gender is a feeling, like an energy field that binds us all together, like paupers in a bathhouse.
Is resulting in a broader call for demedicalization of what is definitely a medical problem. The argument for this is because
There's nothing wrong with trans people. Stop stigmatizing me.
first off, yes, there is something wrong. It's called gender dysphoria. And if you don't have it, the treatment will not only not work, it may actually make you suicidal. The reason transgender activism is so dangerous is because they have created an incredibly ill-defined amorphous framework with no clear criteria as to who exactly is or isn't transgender, or even what it is to be transgender. Anyone can be transgender, with or without any control factors, leaving the community open to infiltration from grifters and predators, all the while being given incredible social, political, and legal protections, especially in the land of the Islamic gender-fluid moose.
Canada, what the F happened to you? Your ass used to be beautiful.
I know it might be tempting for some people who are more conservative to say,
You see, we were right about the gays. Everything's going to shit. Now we have transgenders.
I understand where you're coming from, but the transgender issue is fundamentally new. There have always been gays. Ancient Greece, anyone? For fuck's sake, they even gave the lesbians their own island. Hashtag lesbian apartheid. But transgenders are fundamentally new. Saying that gay people are the reason we have transgenders is like saying the reason we have illegal immigration is because we repealed anti-miscegenation laws. Transgender people, as we currently understand such, have not even been around for 100 years. They are techno-physiological creations, as much related to gay men or lesbian women as electric mobility scooters are related to ponies. So what am I trying to say with all this? I have a couple points I want to make. Trans activism is a force of disruptive chaos because the idea of transness has been so broadly expanded, with ideas like self-ID and gender as a social construct, that any meaningful conversation about what it means to be trans is basically impossible. And because the trans community has no meaningful criteria of what it means to be trans, and anyone who attempts to define it will inevitably be called a
Transphobe.
and shut down. They have no defense mechanisms against bad actors, in the same way a country with open borders would not be able to keep out criminals or disease carriers. Self-identification, coupled with the automatic, vehement defense of anyone who self-identifies as trans, makes it easy for creatures like Jonathan Sorry Not Sorry, Jessica Yaniv, to call themselves trans and claim very real legal protections. The internet is buzzing about the Yaniv thing and how it's exploiting anti-discrimination laws to try to force women to touch whatever passes for his genitals. How she has a history of entering women's restrooms to take pictures and with the goal of interacting with very underage girls. But what can be done? Our disgust will only go so far. Spoiler, probably not very far at all. So long as there isn't an actual standard for what it means to be trans. Trans protection isn't in of itself a bad thing, provided it's being reserved for people who actually need it, i.e. people who are suffering from a medical condition outside their control, who are making good faith efforts to become happy, healthy people. And then there's the cost. It isn't free, cheap, or easy to become a transgender person. It requires years of hormone therapy and layers of increasingly radical cosmetic surgery in the same price range as luxury automobiles. If the person has a valid medical diagnosis, they might be able to pass some of the costs onto state-subsidized healthcare, meaning the rest of us have to pay for it. But usually the costs are out of pocket. Blair White has spoken in the past about how many in the trans community will be pushed into prostitution in order to pay for their transition, which is a nightmarish horror. And this is all assuming the person was even able or bothered to try to get a diagnosis. In cases of self-diagnosis, it's not uncommon for people who were either unable or unwilling to go through the lengthy process and simply went overseas to places like Thailand to have the procedure done, and importing, illegally, unregulated medications. I knew a person, a relatively normal, healthy, gay man, who attempted self-diagnosis and began importing medication from Thailand. This person lost his mind, believing that he as a male had a uterus and could get pregnant. The drugs also poisoned his body, causing uncontrollable mood swings, sleep disturbance, which only fueled his confusion, and sky-high blood pressure. Eventually, he had to be hospitalized and then disappeared for years. I eventually saw again, and he was barely recognizable, never the same. This is anecdotal, yes, but it's hardly unique when you research the subject. Let's not forget that there is an entire cottage industry of gender therapists, nonprofits, and clinics who all profit from these exploitations of vulnerable people. Why do you think children are being pushed to question their gender at ever earlier ages? It's good for business. There's a lot of money to be made. Now, I'm not saying this is the norm for the transgender experience. A, I wouldn't know, and B, there are always going to be extremes. But I firmly believe that it is the fuzzy edges around the concept of transismness that allows for increasing vulnerability to these kinds of extremes, and using the ill-defined, ever-expanding criteria of what it means to be trans to feelings, statements by very young children, and pressure by ever more aggressive trans-inclusive educational programs at ever younger ages that it's a threat to health and safety of children, the mentally ill, and anyone else unfortunate enough to be caught up in this confusing miasma. Trans people don't need visibility. They need help, and they won't get it if the medical community doesn't stand up to political ideology. Pediatricians are afraid. Nurses are afraid. Everyone is afraid because we have allowed legislation meant to protect the vulnerable to be used to give cover to activists and predators. Without intact, robust science and medical oversight, an individual can be led down a dark, expensive, and painful path filled with irreversible medical consequences like permanent body modification and sterility, to say nothing of when the procedures are done incorrectly, which happens more often than many believe, especially if they went overseas. Transgenderism is basically a religion at this point. Most of its adherents are not going to get the surgery. It's too expensive and too difficult for the average person to maintain, though they are working on that part. So you end up with a large number of people who are basically bad cross-dressers, who are invoking a medical condition most of them don't suffer from, and are demanding both victimhood and respect, thanks intersectionality, while also demanding access to gendered facilities and services that, frankly, they have not earned the right to. The Yaniv embodies this. The Yaniv is a disturbed, dangerous person who has embraced an ideology that enables terrible behavior while also granting undeserved protections to do so. This was only possible because of the whole
"Don't question my trans experience, you
transphobe
mindset. I want to round this off by highlighting several more points. 1. Unbridled extremism from trans activists is worsening the already ill-defined parameters of what it means to be trans, to the point where it is increasingly difficult to have a real conversation, even amongst healthcare professionals, as to what it means to be trans. Starting off with the most basic question: who is trans? 2. Without being able to separate legitimate gender dysphoric people from the mentally unstable or the immature and confused, real lasting harm will be visited upon people who are not trans and do not have dysphoria because they have been convinced incorrectly that they are, and they do. 3. Lawsuits involving dubious declarations of transgenderism are going to be increasingly used to force gender-specific businesses and services to accommodate people who have no right to be accommodated. A female waxing salon being forced to wax so-called
female testicles.
trans men demanding access to male bathhouses, etc. This might even result in the collapse of gender-specific services. 4. The gay community cannot accept the false premise that gays and trans are related anymore, because for years, some people have argued that extending rights and tolerance to homosexuals would open the door to predators who go after children. We have pushed back, countering that this was a slippery slope argument. And while it was true that gay marriage, for instance, had very little impact on society as a whole, using us, the gays, as a vehicle, the much less popular and less understood trans movement have piggybacked into the debate, using our cultural clout and vastly superior numbers to say, "Me too." And thanks to all the above points I raised, you can, hopefully, see that while most trans people are just people, there are very real dangers to the open borders approach the trans activists have been pushing for. That's it for now. Like, subscribe, click the bell, follow me on social media, not in real life, and share the video if you think others should see it. Love it, hate it, you already watched it, you can't unwatch it. Thank you for watching.